As has already been noted, the market environment has been incredibly challenging for pension fund trustees and committees. Government bond markets in particular, as Sonia noted, have been incredibly volatile, and we've seen that acutely through the impact on LDI collateral arrangements, for example. However, there have been some positives for UK DB pension schemes as well as a result of significantly higher government bond yields. A circa 200 basis point rise in real yields has meant improved funding levels for many and significantly lower deficits. And what that means is that the prospect of an insurance type transaction is now looking much more achievable for many. Estimates suggest that around 2/3 of pension schemes now have less than 10 years to full funding, so the opportunity is becoming increasingly more of a real prospect for many. So on that note, I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Kail to the stage. Andrew is CEO of Legal & General Retirement Institutional, or as me and you better know that, our buy-in and buyout business. Andrew's going to cover insurers' considerations around buyout, the steps schemes can take to secure a transaction, and how pension schemes can best position themselves to prepare for the end game. Welcome to the stage, Andrew.
Good morning, everybody, and fantastic to be here. I can't remember the last time I gave a talk where boom was in the title, and given the comments in the morning so far, it doesn't really feel a boom sort of place right now, does it, given some of the data we've been looking at, certainly given the backdrop to today's talk. But nevertheless, when it comes to the pension risk transfer, the buyout market, boom is probably an appropriate phrase to use, because the volumes, the activities that we're seeing at Legal & General, talking to other insurers, talking to advisors all around the market, the levels of activity are high because all of you, many of you in this room, as we've just heard, are thinking that buyout or buy-in is something that you likely wanted to do at some point in the future, but the future just got a whole lot sooner for some of the implications of the economics that we've seen. So what I wanted to do for the next few minutes this morning is just give you some perspectives from Legal & General, from an insurer's perspective, about the things that are on our minds as we go through sort of the buyout, the buy-in process, and hopefully some of which is relevant to you as you're thinking about whether it's a process that you are going to be in now or more likely sooner than you may have expected. One apology, my team in putting together my slides have definitely stressed the aquatic theme, probably more than is justifiable. So if you see lots of water references and pictures in my slides, we've probably slightly overdone it, but I'll get that apology in advance, and I'll move on to my first quote, which is from Lewis Pugh, who is a incredibly well-known international swimmer, and a swimmer with whom LGM have a very strong relationship. And the reason I like this quote is it really talks to the amount of preparation that Lewis puts into each and every swim he does. And I'm not saying that swimming in some of the most precarious oceans around the world is quite the same as doing a buy-in or a buyout transaction, although I'm sure there are some parallels. But if you listen to nothing else I say today, and that might be a totally justifiable outcome, preparation is the byword to leave you with, and I'll come on to some details of that. But actually, when we look at transactions that succeed versus those transactions that are troublesome or fail, it's the preparation that is usually somewhere along the chain the thing that really makes a difference. So preparation is the sort of my takeaway line for the day. I just wanted to come on to the market. So why is boom a justifiable word to use about the pension risk transfer market right now? We can see from the slide that it's been a very active market in the UK over many years. I could have gone back further than that. At Legal & General, we've been doing this for some 35 years now, so there's lots of data around this, but we've seen a very significant level of buyout activity over recent years. I think if we get to the 2022, it's certainly going to be higher than 2021 and somewhere in the region of 30 billion. This is the UK slide. If I showed you the US slide or other international slides, they would look similar. And the numbers are quite startling when you think about the marketplace we're in. In the UK, we are taking out somewhere in the region of £30 billion a year of over £2 trillion of defined benefit liabilities. If you take the US market, it's about $40 billion of $3.5 trillion of defined benefit liabilities. Canada would be lower than that. The Netherlands is probably just about to start its own ramp up to high levels of activity. Why do I share this global data? This is becoming quite a global service. If you think about the reinsurers that are also important to this market, if you think about the asset strategies the insurers are deploying, those are very global marketplaces. I know from the business that I lead in Legal and General, where we have active markets in the UK, the US and Canada, when we're looking at transactions, the reinsurance strategy and the reinsurers we're dealing with and the asset strategy we're thinking of deploying to write those transactions, they are global conversations. Of course there are local regulations. Solvency 62 here in the UK is a very important one, but nevertheless this is turning into an increasingly global business. And so if you think about the way in which we're de-risking, some 12% of the UK's defined benefit liabilities have been de-risked through insurance, only 12%. In the US, it's even lower. It's about 10% of the 3.5 trillion. So we are going to see, if economic and other considerations prevail, large pension risk transfer markets in certainly 4 major economies for many years to come. And if you ask commentators around the market, we would be one of them, these historical averages are going to increase. There are certain commentators that would say it's not beyond all possibilities that in the next 5 years we'll see a £70 billion market here in the UK. There are some very large pension schemes out there that if they choose to de-risk in a certain profile will drive some very high volumes. So this is all incredibly important, and when we look at some of the survey data about the desire of trustees to move to buyout versus self-sufficiency, you're starting to see high levels of activity that we can expect in the marketplace. That means all the insurers and the reinsurers are actively planning in their businesses, working with all of the marketplace for significantly high levels of business in the next few years, which has implications for the types of schemes that come to market and when. So I just want to give that market context. In terms of what we are then seeing as market trends, and I know a lot of you will be seeing these too, I just thought I would mention a few and maybe sort of dive into a couple of them. The full scheme transactions is the first one. I think there are a few reasons behind this. We know that funding levels in many pension schemes have increased tremendously in the last 12 months, whether that's higher interest rates, widening credit spreads. I think when you're getting your latest valuations, your latest pricing information, you're seeing that you are closer to full funding or closer to buyout than you've been before. Certainly when we are having our conversations with our clients and the advisors, schemes that were definitely thinking it was 24 or 25 when a pricing activation would start, we're doing that now or next year. We've definitely seen quite a significant shift. And so our pipeline at Legal & General, I don't think the team would, when you talk to the team, we've never seen it as active in terms of people that are now into wanting a pricing conversation. And they're wanting a pricing conversation about a full scheme transaction. I think there's also reasons behind that. It's certainly talking to reinsurers, their pricing and attitude around deferreds is definitely changing as well. So it's not just funding levels, it's the ability as well of the insurers to price and write those transactions on a full scheme basis is changing. So we are seeing that trend at all levels, probably more prevalent at the smaller end of the market. And I should have said that I'm going to come on to talk about return of the mega deals. Certainly, mega deals often get the £1 billion plus deals, jumbos as they refer to them in the US, get most of the profile. By volume, by number of deals, the vast majority at Legal & General we do would be much smaller than that. And we are one of the insurers that writes deals right across the market from £1 million upwards. So that's not true of all insurers in the market, but certainly from a perspective of working with all of you, there's no size criteria that comes with Legal & General. That said, we are seeing a return to the mega deals, this funding level that I talked about, some of the major schemes. There are some pension schemes out there in the market, there may be even in the room, where the size of their scheme is the size of the entire UK market. There are some very large, tens of £1 billion schemes that are coming to a level of maturity where buyout conversations will start. And therefore we are seeing a return of the mega deals, and we are seeing insurers certainly working with reinsurers and even third-party capital thinking about how do they help de-risk those insurers. I certainly want to be in a position at Legal & General where if a client comes to us and wants a quote, we're able to say yes because we've got the structures in place to work with that client to de-risk it in a way that's appropriate for them, whether that's in one piece or multiple pieces. But I think we will see, certainly in the UK and definitely in the US market, some of the very large pension schemes start their buy-in, buy-out journeys in the next few years, and that is going to change the profile of the market. I wanted to touch on umbrella contracts. I think these are a really interesting development. We have a number of these at Legal & General's, and an umbrella contract, as we would define it, is an arrangement with a pension scheme where it's not exclusivity in that all of the transactions, the de-risking transactions, have to come to us contractually, but it's an arrangement where all of the contracts, the legals, the data, the working together in the advisory ecosystem has already been put in place on one transaction, so subsequent transactions are just so much easier. And as I say, it's not contractual exclusivity. Those clients could go to another insurer for second or subsequent tranches. But breaking the back of the work, or that preparation that I talked about, and having that in place on tranche one, so it flows through to subsequent tranches, we have found that to be an incredibly useful tool when working particularly with those schemes that aren't going to do a single transaction but are looking to de-risk a transaction over a number of tranches. So if anyone's interested in a conversation about it, I'm very happy to, because we've certainly found that as a really useful tool to help schemes work through the buy-in, buy-out process. Alternative options, again, we're seeing, certainly at Legal & General, I know other insurers are too, thinking about where buyout is not for everybody, even for reasons of funding or other reasons. There are now, I think, and I think it's a really good innovation, alternative solutions being created to help companies de-risk. And certainly at Legal & General, we have a number of those. Others do too. I think this is a really helpful tool in the toolkit to allow schemes to manage their profile when buyout is not for them, whether, say, for funding or other reasons. So I think that's a great innovation that we're seeing now across the market. As I mentioned, we write a number of smaller schemes. Those processes, often the resources those schemes have, are not the same as the multi-billion-pound schemes. So we've developed specific processes and protocols to work with smaller schemes in a more accelerated way. And again, we found that useful to engage with trustees in a really helpful way. So I think streamlined solutions is another good innovation we're seeing. And then the final one that I wanted to mention in terms of market trends is where we're seeing reduced sort of either sole or sort of small number insurers participating on a process. Coming back to preparation, trustees have decided that in the UK, where there are 8 active insurers quoting, they don't want to open up the process to all 8 insurers on an auction process, which many still do, but a number are now using criteria to say actually there's a smaller subset of those insurers that we think it's best we work with, and we're still comfortable by doing that. We'll get a market clearing leading price and a really good process. So we are starting to see that, again, I'd say particularly at the larger end, where people are looking to streamline their processes and move to a smaller group of insurers. So just some of the things that we're seeing right now in the market in the buyout schemes. My clicker works. I'll move to my next slide. So I've definitely stretched the aquatic theme here, because this is not about a cycling proficiency badge to enable you to do buyouts. And for those of you that don't like a good corporate acronym, I apologise. I'm probably one of them. But we've been using this acronym of a badge for some time now. I don't think any of this is rocket science. It's probably really obvious. But coming back to preparation, and when we see transactions fail, it's probably for one of those 6 things that is the reason the transaction doesn't go ahead. And so we have this methodology and process of working with advisors and with schemes to say, can we really understand through each of these how it is that you're preparing for buyout. So just to, I mean, I say they're probably quite obvious, but just to walk through these briefly. Affordability is obviously an obvious one, and as a number of people have mentioned, including me, affordability for many schemes has just become a whole lot earlier. That as they're receiving their sort of funding valuations, or they're receiving indicative prices from insurers, the buy-in, buyout is definitely sooner than they thought. So affordability is critical, And we have been, I think, sort of working with companies who have been surprised just how affordable the buy-in or the buyout now is as a result of those movements. So that's clearly critical. On benefits, I think that the message I portray on benefits is it's often the case that without the trustees clearly understand the benefits, so does the corporate sponsor, but hasn't the benefit information been produced, documented in a legally robust way such that you can hand it over to an insurer in a way that they can properly price it? Often where there are discretionary benefits that are given that aren't coded into the schemes, that's where we see the document. I think on the benefits side, we see the documentation falling down. So it's that emphasis on, can you really, whilst you understand your benefits, can you really hand them on to a third party by your advisors to make sure that those are clear and that they're able to be priced, because that's an area of debate that we often get into. Assets is a sort of very interesting one. I think if I spoke to the team a lot of the time, increasingly now, particularly on the larger schemes we're spending conversation time on, is understanding the asset base of the scheme, particularly where those assets are illiquids. And how can we use the assets of the pension scheme? How can they fully contribute towards the premium? And this is, I say, particularly on the larger schemes, a constant source of debate as to how we can take those assets and use them towards the premium. So whether those be properties, whether those be ground rents, or all sort of manner of assets that broadly fall into illiquids. So I think a really early conversation with your advisors about the assets you have, how you valued them, and particularly how you might transfer to the insurer. And one of the things we've found in the schemes, and I'll come on to some data later, is working through LGIM, often where LGIM is the asset manager of the scheme, is an incredibly helpful way of making that transfer smooth, because the in-house understanding of what's a useful pension asset scheme that can flow through to contribute to a buyout premium, that understanding can be very helpful as a piece of advice. So that's really, really important. Data, your data won't be perfect. If it is, wow, how did you do that? No data is ever perfect. This is definitely something sort of we're not looking for perfect data as we do a buyout. But again, how you've documented that, how you've understood the gaps, how you've thought through issues like GMP, to present that to a third party such that they can price it, again, sounds obvious. But again, if we get into transactions and where are they troublesome, where are they difficult, the data we're given on mortality, marital status, GMP, whatever I say, have it not been thought through in advance creates a more difficult process. So again, working with your advisors and making sure that the data transfer is as clean as it can be, recognizing it's bound to be imperfect, it always is, and how you're going to deal with that is really important. Governance is an interesting one, and we talked about governance in the last session, but how you as trustees are going to run this process. How are you going to approach the insurers? Are you going to go to the full market? Are you going to go to a selection? Price is always going to be a critical component of any decision you make, credit quality too. But how are you going to think through and test out the service model, the customer service model of the insurer you might select? That's sort of, again, when we look at schemes and how they're run, it's certainly not every scheme that wants to come and visit our customer service team or have a conversation with our customer service team about how their members are going to be dealt with. It's always an important consideration, but the way that some insurers choose to test that, the way they choose to prose that varies quite enormously. We hear a lot, certainly in from the consultants and the advisors about the growing importance of ESG. How are you going to take things like ESG into your considerations? What does that actually mean by way of a process? We're certainly seeing it have higher profile, but again, it's less clear how you bake it into your process. So that governance process, again, I think is important because it comes on to the last point, how are you then going to engage? What's the process you're going to run, and how are you going to engage with the advisors, with the corporate sponsor, with the insurers? Again, obvious, but really critical. We see some really good examples and then some more sort of difficult examples, often sort of particularly with the corporate sponsor. So that's the badge. I think it's hopefully quite obvious, but equally it's the thing where people fall down. But we find it quite a useful model to sort of help schemes think through, whether they are ready indeed for a buy-in, buy-out conversation. And then I just wanted to finish with a point I made earlier about the importance of how all of this comes together and how it stitches together. And if you look at that statistic on the slide, I mean, it's amazing, really. 84% of the buyout transactions we've done over the past 3 years have been with existing LGIM clients. It's all part of that relationship where working through with LGIM understands the sort of the asset base and can help advise, obviously, with appropriate independence safeguards in place to make sure all of this relationship works. We have a phrase at L&G about one L&G. That's absolutely what we hope that we're bringing to what you're doing, that you see that service move from having a pension scheme being managed typically through buy-in and then ultimately into finality and buyout. So that sort of how that engagement works is key. So just to wrap up for me, I think we're still just coming up to time and coffee break. But as I said at the start, this is I think an incredibly exciting time for you as trustees as you think about the next few years and where the buy-in buyout model might take you. Looking at the data that I see, it's still for the vast majority of pension schemes what they're ultimately hoping that they can do with the pension scheme. It's the gold standard in terms of finality. The insurance market, the reinsurance market are very heavily invested in this in providing the capacity. As I say, it's becoming increasingly global. We're seeing not just the UK, but US, Canada, and the Netherlands. This marketplace is accelerating at about the same level. So it's becoming a crowded space. And in that crowded space, I think that's why I said the preparation for me is absolutely key. Working with your advisors, working with the corporate sponsor, working with asset managers, working with the insurers to get the right schemes for you in a time frame that suits your goals and objectives. And goes without saying, making sure ultimately you're confident that the experience your members are going to get when you make that transfer is absolutely a service that we can all be proud of, and it's certainly something I'll finish on that we're incredibly proud of the feedback and investment we place into Legal & General, making sure that your members are treated in a way that you'd be absolutely sort of proud of and happy to hand over. So that's all from me. I hope you're sort of given you some insights as to where the market is going, some insights as to some things to think about and focus on as you consider where your buy-in, buyout journey might take you.